This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Mali's political crisis deepens as President Boubacar Keïta resigns after military mutiny. The Democratic candidate Joe Biden is officially nominated for the U.S. presidency. And how a Nigerian woman is teaching vulnerable children about COVID-19. Hello and welcome to Africa Live on CGTN with me, Beatrice Marshall, in Nairobi. Also coming up this hour, the World Bank delays a $1.5 billion rescue package for Nigeria due to concerns over reforms. And we catch up with retired Springbok and 2019 Rugby World Cup winner Tendai Mtawawira. Well, let's start with the goings-on in Mali. It's been a dramatic 24 hours for Mali's President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta. In an address on state television, Keïta resigned and dissolved parliament. This came after mutinying soldiers arrested Keïta, his son and Prime Minister Boubou Cissé. Several other senior government officials were also arrested. The soldiers behind the coup are calling themselves the National Committee for the Salvation of the People. While addressing the nation, Keïta acknowledged his resignation was forced, but stated he wanted to avoid bloodshed. While world bodies and regional blocs are opposing the developments in Mali, the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres has condemned the arrest of the West African country's top leadership and is calling for the restoration of law and order. China's foreign ministry has also joined in condemnation over the forced regime change. The African Union says it strongly rejects the unconstitutional change of government. The European Union's foreign policy chief Joseph Borrell tweeted to condemn what he says is an attempted coup d'etat. The Economic Community of West African States, of which Mali is a member, is calling on its 14 other members to close land and air borders to Mali and impose financial sanctions. Well, let's turn to Coletta Wanjohi now for more on the African Union's reaction.
The African Union Commission Chairperson Musa Faki Mahamat says the events in Mali amount to an unconstitutional change of government. He is calling on soldiers who arrested the president to cease all violence and respect the country's institutions. The African Union only upholds changes of government through elections. The Union's West African bloc, ECOWAS, says it will send a high-level delegation to Mali to establish constitutional order. It has shut down all their land and air borders with Mali and says it will also hold trade relations with the country. The bloc has also threatened sanctions against those who attempted the coup and their partners. As recently as July, ECOWAS held a summit to discuss the socio-political status of Mali. On 7th August, the AU Peace and Security Council noted that there was a continued threat of constitutional order in the country, mainly because unresolved issues persisted relating to governance, security and development. Coletta Wanjohi, CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
While the country's political unrest has been taking place over the course of several months, Ashta Tal has the details on how a political protest movement culminated into a mutiny.
For months, Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta had been facing calls to step down as Mali's president. Frustration over continued attacks by jihadists in the country's north and allegations of corruption reached a boiling point in June. A constitutional court decision to overturn results of the parliamentary elections spurred continued mass protest. The protests were organized by the June 5 movement. ECOWAS stepped in an attempt to resolve the political unrest. Per their recommendation, Keïta dissolved the Constitutional Court and new judges were appointed. The West African regional body also submitted proposals to form a unity government with the opposition. The opposition rejected the proposals. They remained steadfast that Keïta had to step down. This culminated in the August 18th mutiny led by soldiers based in the Kati army camp. The soldiers received support from Bamako residents.
A multitude of events have been organized. To see the military giving their support today is a relief. We pray to God that this is the end.
We are happy to see Mali is starting to breathe. The children are outside defending their rights, which they see being flouted because the future belongs to the children.
As news of the mutiny spread, some started looting and destroying government buildings. The military, for its part, maintains it has no plans to hold on to power. Calling themselves the National Committee for the Salvation of the People, they said the main objective was to hold general elections in a reasonable time frame. Astatal, CGTN.
Well, let's get you the latest now. I'm joined by CGTN's Phil Haza. He's joining me from Abuja, and Ross Cullen in Paris. Phil, let's start off with you because those are dramatic developments coming out of Mali and dramatic pictures we are seeing there from Mali. What is happening today there?
Well, thank you, Beatrice. Indeed, it's a dramatic situation in Mali, quite a tense one as well, that has woken the world to the realities that we've been seeing in Mali in the past weeks. It has culminated now into a coup. So what we saw that started as protest, evolved into mutiny, and then we're now very clear that it is indeed a coup that has forced also the outgoing president, Ibrahim Boubacar Keita, to resign. He said he was forced to do that because he didn't want any bloodshed, and so he didn't want to hold on to power, and he hopes that Mali can go back to its peaceful state. So it's quite a lot of jubilation as well, among citizens, among anti-government protesters that have poured out in the streets to also congratulate and support the military. They are happy that indeed their call for the resignation of Ibrahim Boubacar Keita has finally been heeded. But of course, they're getting a lot of international condemnation, towards the kind of approach. This is not the first time we're seeing it. It's happened in 2012. The military now had a transitional government and then elections that brought in this same man, Ibrahim Boubacar Keita, but he became unpopular, and he's seeing the same thing happen as it is now.
Well, Phil, just to go back a little bit of a recap of what happened overnight, because you're talking about jubilation today on the streets across Mali, but what happened overnight?
Well, overnight, there was a state, address, the television address from the president, the outgoing president, Ibrahim Boubacar Keita, giving resigning his position as well as his prime minister. So that also confirmed reports that we earlier heard that the soldiers abducted, government officials and, of course, the president and his prime minister. So all of that rumors were put to rest once we got a wind of that information that the president has released a state television address to resign his position. There's been calls, condemning that forceful resignation and abduction by the coup plotters, most of them military commanders in the Kati garrison camp there, which is 15 kilometers from the capital Bamako. So at the moment, that's the reaction from what happened overnight in Mali.
Ross, over to you, because there have been international condemnation over the events in Mali. France has great influence in Mali and is among countries that have condemned the mutiny. What more is coming out of Paris regarding this development?
Well, Beatrice, France saying it condemns in the strongest possible terms what's happened in Mali, but saying that it stands squarely behind ECOWAS. And that is important because, as you say, France is a major player in the region diplomatically and militarily, but it wants to see the Economic Community of West African States, the regional body, take the lead on this, as we heard from Phil and also from our colleague Coletta earlier. France wants to see the African Union and ECOWAS. They've already responded strongly closing the borders with other ECOWAS states. So France wants to associate it with that response from ECOWAS. But the Foreign Ministry here in Paris has released a statement, and they are monitoring the events closely, saying that they do, though, continue to support Malian sovereignty and Malian democracy, but they are monitoring events.
All right, Phil, so the regional body, the Economic Commission of West African States, has halted trade relations with Mali after the mutiny, and is calling on its member states to close its air and land borders with Mali. Can you tell us more about this?
Yes, indeed, the ECOWAS has condemned in strong terms the, abduction and forceful resignation of their leader, Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta. And so they've imposed sanctions, financial sanctions. They're calling for all member states, to stop trade or any form of relations with the Mali, the country Mali. Now, it's a landlocked nation in Africa. It's among the least developed nations in the world. They are supposed to be the highest producer of gold, but they're struggling with poverty, insecurity, which has gone on for years as a result of insurgency in the country. And that's part of the reasons why the anti-government protesters have been in the streets. So the ECOWAS is saying they're also going to be sending a team from the bloc representing the ECOWAS bloc to Mali to ensure that the military, follow what they've stated, that they're going to hand over to a transitional government and not hold on to power. Of course, the ECOWAS would not support a military regime. They want to ensure that the transitional government is in place, and as early as possible, another election is conducted, if at all they cannot get Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta back into his position.
All right, so Ross, how is Mali's isolation by ECOWAS, though, likely to influence developments in the country in coming days?
Well, France has 5,000 troops in the region, and it's also associated with the EU, which pumps hundreds of millions of dollars into the area of the Sahel, the southern Sahara, that area that includes the 5 countries of the G5, Mauritania, Burkina Faso, Chad, Niger and Mali. That EU aid coming in the form of a humanitarian package to try to improve access to water, access to food, deal with malnutrition problems, as well and improve the sanitary situation and healthcare. So France has a lot of impact, and Emmanuel Macron has called his fellow government, the 5 presidents, to a conference in January. He attended one in June in Mauritania as well, to try to keep up pressure for the insurgency that Phil mentioned earlier, this attempt to disrupt and dismantle armed groups operating in those countries, particularly in Mali, many of which are inspired by or affiliated with Al-Qaeda or the so-called Islamic State. France has fighter jets, helicopters, armoured personnel carriers, and all the logistics as well that go to support 5,000 troops. Now, those soldiers often work with local forces as well. So France will be paying particular attention to see what happens now with the instability provoked by this coup in Mali, now with the army taking over and saying it's going to hold fresh elections. But France will be paying attention, because if this instability does spill over into any other neighbouring states, France has forces and has soldiers working in those countries, and also humanitarian aid workers as well. And we saw the killings of 6 aid workers in Niger previously. So France will be paying special attention to what happens, making sure that it doesn't want to see any instability spill over into neighbouring states. But at the moment, it's Operation Barkhane, that mission to dismantle these armed groups operating in the region, does continue. But as we've heard from the French Foreign Ministry, the French authorities at the highest level are monitoring events closely.
All right, Phil Ihaza joining us there from Abuja, and Ross Cullen joining us there from Paris. To you both, thank you for that update. Well, let's now cross over to Michael Arunga, an independent analyst who's joining us via Skype. Michael, good to see you there. The situation in Mali has gotten even more complicated today. Any winners in the current situation, do you think?
Yeah, the situation is adverse, but I've been in Mali for the last 1 year, Beatrice, and it has been challenging, based in Bamako. I was supposed to be in central Mali within an area called Sevare. But because of insecurity, because of a lack of proper access by humanitarian organizations, the people have been desperate. I've been able to talk to them until last month when I came back to Nairobi. And they are not satisfied, they have not been happy. It's been a situation that has been building up. We have had demonstrations that have been taking place. The last demonstration that took place when I was in Mali, actually they got representatives who went over to State House to ask the president for dialogue to be able to engage with him, a peaceful kind of approach. He declined, even to, they were not able to gain access. They went back to the crowds that had gathered within Bamako and pleaded with them. The crowd actually dispersed, and they were able to go back to their home. So I think this has been building up. It is something us who have been in Mali have been alive to. It has not been easy. There's a lot of insecurity in central and northern Mali around Timbuktu. So just very, very difficult kind of living conditions for the Malian people that I think it was bound to happen.
Well, Michael, you mentioned that this has been building up over the last year. You've been witnessing this while you've been there. So give us the undercurrents that have led to this build-up. What are the various interests that have brought Mali to where it is today?
There's around lack of proper governance, especially. I was there, went over to Mali because of the humanitarian crisis. But then when I was there, and a big crisis, because over 5 million people have been affected. They required, the basics of life, food, shelter, and so forth. A lot of displacements. I've visited the displaced people camp within Sevare in central Mali, for example. So a dire need in terms of the current setting. And I think high on the agenda, as I've shared, has been to do with insecurity. Issues to good access. I was in Bamako. I was supposed to have gone to Sevare. But because of kidnappings, 2 of my colleagues were kidnapped and detained for 105 days. So these kind of challenges that made it impossible for a normal, functional kind of setting within Mali has made it difficult. And I've been able to engage with them as a communications person, talking to those who are affected, the Malian people. And they have been crying out for intervention, that things need to normalize. They were hoping that, things would change. We've had elections during a period where there was COVID, actually. The world was focusing on COVID. Right. Mali had elections. So these are dire things that are built up, but there's been a lot of unhappiness, a lot of, I think, appealing to the world to be able to pay attention. Right. Meetings have been held, but then a situation, or rather a solution, has not been forthcoming. So this, in my opinion, was forthcoming, and it was inevitable that it was going to happen.
All right, Michael Arunga, an independent analyst joining us there from Bamako via Skype. Well, this is not the first nor the second coup in Mali. CGTN Wanja Mungai takes a look at Mali's troubled political past.
In 2012, just a month to elections, military soldiers plot to overthrow the government of Amadou Toumani Touré. This was driven by a purported mishandling of the insurgency up north by the Tuareg rebels. The mutiny would lead to a coup d'etat that saw Touré ousted and forced into hiding, ending his 10-year rule. By then, Tuareg rebels had managed to enter the key towns of Mali, including Kidal, Gao, and Timbuktu. They declared the northern region an independent state. They named it Azawad and made Gao the capital. ECOWAS would then offer to mediate talks between members of MNLA. Talks between the government and the Mali National Liberation of Azawad and the Tuaregs led to a peace deal and later elections. Earlier in 1991, the Malian troops staged a coup that was popularly known as the March Revolution. This led to the ousting of the president, Moussa Traoré. Traoré had ruled the country for over 2 decades. The events of 1991 eventually led to multi-party elections. President Moussa Traoré had himself seized power from President Modibo Keïta in another coup in 1968. This was 8 years after independence from France, where he installed himself as president of a one-party state in 1979. Wanja Mungai, CGTN.
You're watching Africa Live, still ahead on the program. Democratic candidate Joe Biden is officially nominated to the U.S. presidency. And how a Nigerian woman is teaching vulnerable children about COVID-19.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
The second night of the U.S. Democratic National Convention has just wrapped up. Former Vice President Joe Biden has been formally nominated as the party's candidate for November's presidential election. CGTN's Nathan King reports from the White House.
Well, night two of the remote Democratic convention, and there were some unconventional things in it, especially the roll call, which actually officially made Joe Biden the candidate of the Democratic Party for president. Normally they get up in the hall and wave their names of their state and pledge the delegates, the number of delegates, either for Joe Biden or in this case Bernie Sanders. Joe Biden was put over the top, but instead of course being close together in the hall, in the age of COVID-19, cameras went around all 50 states and other territories filming little videos. It was a nice sort of travelogue around the United States, showing its geographical diversity and the diversity of its people. There were some funny bits as well about calamari in Rhode Island. You can look it up. Also, this theme was about leadership, of course, and we had heavy hitters, former President Jimmy Carter, former President Bill Clinton. Jimmy Carter basically talking about Joe Biden being a man of integrity, the man that you need to lead the country. Now, Bill Clinton echoing those themes, but also, like Michelle Obama on the first night of this convention, going directly after US President Trump.
If you want a president who defines the job as spending hours a day watching TV and zapping people on social media, he's your man.
And that was a theme echoed by former Secretary of State John Kerry, one of the architects of the Iran deal, saying that when the US president went abroad, it was more like a TV blooper tape than a goodwill mission. And we heard from Republicans as well. Cindy McCain, the wife of the late Senator John McCain, narrating a video about the unlikely friendship between Joe Biden and her late husband. It was pretty moving. Then we heard from Colin Powell, the former National Security Advisor and Secretary of State, who controversially helped push for the Iraq War, but backing Joe Biden. So there is a feeling here that he's trying to reach out to disaffected Republicans, potentially, who may not want to re-elect the current US President, President Trump. But of course, having Republicans, especially controversial ones like Colin Powell, will annoy some progressives who voted against the Iraq War. So it's a balancing act. Interestingly, the US President Trump, while this remote convention was going on, he went to two states, Iowa up in the north, and of course Arizona all the way down in the south, to look at the wall. He is trying to show people that as this is a remote Democratic convention, he is on the move as commander-in-chief and acting very presidential. Of course, they have their convention next week. Nathan King, CGTN at the White House.
Well, some universities in the United States are suspending in-person classes and bringing them back online after reports of new campus outbreaks. The University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill has confirmed over 130 infections among students and staff in the past week. In the Midwest, the University of Notre Dame and Michigan State have also announced remote classes over coronavirus concerns. And over 150 students at the Colorado College are in quarantine due to possible exposure. The United States has the world's highest number of COVID-19 infections, with more than 5.4 million cases and over 170,000 deaths. EU leaders are due to hold an emergency meeting today to discuss the ongoing protest in Belarus against the president's re-election. Earlier, the Belarusian president awarded medals to law enforcement members following a crackdown on demonstrators. Julia Chapman reports.
The Belarusian government has published a list of 300 law enforcement officials who will be awarded medals for impeccable service. It comes after at least 2 protesters were killed and thousands of others were arrested in a violent crackdown after widespread demonstrations following the re-election of President Alexander Lukashenko. Meanwhile, there has been a council for the transition of power established by opposition leader Svetlana Tikhanovskaya from exile in Lithuania. She released a video message on Tuesday to mark the birthday of her husband Sergei, who was arrested in May and remains in prison for organizing pre-election protests. She said that he was being denied a fair trial, and she passed on a message from her husband to the Belarusian people, calling for them to not stand idly by, but to demand change in the country. The opposition has dismissed claims by Alexander Lukashenko that he would consider fresh elections as a trick. Here in Russia, Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, has been speaking on the phone about Belarus with both French President Emmanuel Macron and German Chancellor Angela Merkel. The German Chancellor urged Belarusian authorities to stop the violent crackdown on protesters. On Wednesday, European leaders are expected to meet for an emergency summit on Belarus, where sanctions against certain officials are expected to be on the table. Vladimir Putin urged both the French and German leaders not to interfere in Belarusian affairs. Julia Chapman, CGTN, Moscow.
Ethiopia's Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has removed Defense Minister Lema Magesa from office as part of a reshuffle of his cabinet. The move by the Prime Minister is the latest measure in the restructuring of his administration ahead of the next general election. Here's CGTN's Girum Chala with the details.
Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has reshuffled the holders of more than 10 posts and replaced several key officials too. This includes the removal of Lema Magesa, the country's Minister of Defense and former strong ally of Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed. He's been replaced by Kana Ayadeta, who takes over the defense docket. Lema had parted ways with Abiy after opposing the formation of the Prosperity Party, formally taking over from the former Ethiopian People's Revolutionary Democratic Front, EPRDF, a four-party coalition that ruled the country for 27 years. The Prime Minister has also appointed a new Attorney General, while the Mayor of Addis Ababa City, Takala Uma, has been moved to the Ministry of Mines and Petroleum. Takala has been replaced by Adanich Habebe, who is an experienced politician. She has become the first female mayor of the city of Addis Ababa. Recently, the security fears have gripped the Horn of Africa country after violence erupted last month following the killing of Oromo activist and singer Hachalu Hundessa. Deadly clashes and destruction of properties had been witnessed in various places in the country's most populous and largest state, Oromia. The government has arrested more than 9,000 people in connection with crimes committed. Grumtala CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Now, before the coronavirus pandemic hit Nigeria, UNICEF had reported that 13 million children were out of school. Now, with schools shut, the pandemic has cut off even more children from learning. Kelechi Emekelam brings us the story of one woman who is teaching vulnerable children about COVID-19.
The Kuchingworo IDP camp in Nigeria's capital is home to hundreds of children. Kids like Mariam Sulaiman have been here for years, escaping a Boko Haram insurgency. She's among millions of children unable to access online learning and information on COVID-19. She recently benefited from educators that provide much-needed materials, both to keep up with school and be better informed about the coronavirus pandemic.
Since I have this book, I've been learning about coronavirus. And when I went outside and come back, I wash my hand. And when I'm not alone, I put my face mask. I want to tell them thank them for giving us this book.
This initiative is the brainchild of education enthusiast Raquel Daniel. Her concern for vulnerable children grew after the coronavirus pandemic hit Nigeria.
I just thought, you know what, kids need to be aware of what the coronavirus is. Kids need to be told what the coronavirus is, and that's how I went back home and I decided to write a booklet. I realized that we need to create something that is more extensive, that can explain to children why schools are closed. You know, when schools will open again, what they should do, pending when their home, and depending when schools reopen. We work only with the IDPs because a lot of people neglect them, really. A lot of people neglect IDP. People forget that these people actually are not living in their homes.
With about 2,000 copies of the books distributed, children in these vulnerable communities can arm themselves with information on safety practices. Raquel is looking beyond the classroom. She says she has kept an estimated 3,000 pupils in school and supported 15,000 girls on reproductive education. The education enthusiast has also mobilized over 5 million in relief funds for vulnerable women. Now she plans to scale her work, but funding has been stalled due to the COVID-19 outbreak. But she hopes that more humanitarian agencies will pay more attention to children who have been completely cut off from e-learning in the country. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
And we still have more news for you here on the program. Here's what's ahead. The World Bank delays a $1.5 billion rescue package for Nigeria due to concerns over reforms. And Africa and China experts brainstorm over manufacturing amid the COVID-19 pandemic.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
The World Bank is reported to be unlikely to approve a much-needed $1.5 billion package sought by Nigeria. The delay is due to concerns over whether or not Africa's largest oil producer will actually deliver on long-delayed economic policy changes. For several years now, the World Bank and the IMF have repeatedly called for a more flexible and unified exchange rate, the removal of fuel subsidies, as well as an increase in electricity tariffs. In March, Nigeria's central bank devalued the naira by 7%, but it still maintains the dollar-naira peg at around 386 naira to the dollar. This policy has had the side effect of making dollar scarcity much worse, with the central bank rationing access. A delay in financing from multilateral lenders could leave Africa's biggest economy, which has been struggling to adapt to low oil prices, unable to fully finance its $28.4 billion budget for 2020. And still in Nigeria, the country is gearing up to resume international flights after shutting down its airport in March to curb the spread of COVID-19. Flights will resume from August the 29th from Lagos, the West African nation's commercial hub, and Abuja, its capital city. Nigeria opened up its domestic airports in July while enforcing safety protocols, such as the use of masks, hand sanitizers, and social distancing during travel. Home to some 200 million people, Africa's most populous country has registered over 49,000 confirmed COVID-19 cases. A total of 975 have succumbed to the virus. Some 36,500 people have also recovered. Well, collectively, SMEs are the biggest employers in Uganda. However, as businesses resume operations after months of lockdown, many of these enterprises are struggling to stay afloat. For many, their revenue has drastically fallen due to restrictions imposed to limit the spread of COVID-19. CGTN's Michael Baleke has the details.
The new normal, Serena Tugume, has just reopened for business after 4 months of lockdown. She's run this bridal hair and makeup salon for 12 years. But the COVID-19 pandemic has changed the way she works.
Before a person comes in, we check their temperature. If your temperature is high, then we ask you to stay outside, to step away. While we're working on a client, we all wear masks and face shields. It's quite challenging, working like that, and yet it is important.
Serena employs 10 people, but even though business is slow, there are extra costs to comply with the COVID-19 guidelines. Before the pandemic, Serena would use the same makeup equipment, but now the COVID-19 restrictions require that she invests in additional tools to be able to work through several clients. Her worry is the uncertainty that comes with COVID-19.
We were not buying all these masks in the past, and face shields, and increasing even our own equipment, makeup brushes, and all the stuff that we use when we're working on people. But then it is important because we have to make sure that we are protecting ourselves and our people that we are working on. So,
in this village outside the capital Kampala, Sam Turiatunga runs a beverage factory. Due to low sales during the lockdown, he has cut back his workforce by 60%.
It is not easy to get money from a customer now as it was before. Before it would be very simple, but these times are very hard. A customer spending, he has to be very careful. He has to be very, he chooses what to spend on.
As the government eased the COVID-19 restrictions, Sam temporarily closed his factory and ventured into face mask distribution.
Since we went into the face mask supply business, we were able to make some sales that have enabled us even to improve our facilities. Yeah, then another thing is that during this period we have been conducting trainings in industrial beverage processing. So we have empowered over 100 SMEs to start smaller scale beverage companies.
From the face masks proceeds, he's bought more land and is using this time to refurbish and expand his beverage factory. But even as enterprises like Sam's and Serena's strive to stay in business, the recent spike in COVID-19 infections may even be a bigger threat to their survival. Mike Kobaleke, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
The China-Africa Joint Research and Exchange Conference is underway in the Kenyan capital. This year's event is focusing on fighting COVID-19 and building manufacturing capacity across African economies. CGTN's Terry Wangare has the details.
Delegates from China, Kenya, South Africa and Nigeria gathered virtually for the conference with one goal: to discuss the impact of COVID-19 in the manufacturing sector and enhance China-Africa cooperation in fighting the pandemic. In wake of the pandemic, African countries are in dire need for a constant supply of medical and personal protective equipment. With enhanced cooperation between the two economies, this could provide an opportunity for Africa's manufacturing sector to meet this demand in a cost-effective way.
Post-COVID manufacturing is key to creating new sources of livelihood on the continent. Africa and China need to scale up their cooperation in industrialization and manufacturing as a necessary step towards post-COVID-19 recovery agenda. Without a doubt, investment in Africa is key to post-COVID economic recovery.
It thus has meant that countries can be forced to do with limited importation of manufactured products. The urgent need for personal protective equipment has been a clear example of the urgency needed to build manufacturing capacity, to manufacture personal protective equipment to save lives, and to slow down the rate of infections. This fresh example motivates the need to enhance China-Africa cooperation on fighting COVID-19 and promoting manufacturing.
The two-day conference also focuses on a series of issues. These include China-Africa cooperation in infrastructure development and its role in boosting the manufacturing industry in Africa, and the opportunities available and measures needed to promote cooperation in the post-COVID world.
We should continue to provide room for manufacturing cooperation. In recent years, a number of industrial parks and special economic zones in African countries have been completed and put into operation, providing a favorable environment for foreign businesses, including the Chinese ones, to invest in Africa. In the future, African countries can continue to improve industrial parks and special economic zones and try to attract investment from more international businesses.
The coronavirus has impacted negatively in the global economy. Africa and China included. But with tragedy comes a silver lining where Africa, through cooperation with China, can develop its manufacturing sector to cater to the continent's needs while creating a livelihood for millions. After all, there's nothing more empowering than consuming goods that are made in Africa. Terry Wangari, CGTN.
While small medium enterprises are slowly resuming activity in the Democratic Republic of Congo. As in the case with so many other countries, this pandemic throttled trade and shut down much economic activity. Small businesses in the DRC are known for managing to somehow get through the worst of times. But as Chris Ochamringa found out, life after lockdown is proving to be as challenging as ever.
Business is slowly picking up in the DRC capital, Kinshasa. This printing firm is among hundreds of small and medium-sized enterprises that are still reeling from the impact of coronavirus. It recorded a sharp fall in its revenue after the government ordered a lockdown in April that was lifted last month. But its managing director has found new ways of running operations.
We have had to adapt to life after COVID-19 restrictions by reducing the number of our bulk sales. Before the pandemic, we used to print a minimum of 100 t-shirts for our clients. But we can't even print one t-shirt because many people don't have as much money as they used to.
The COVID-19 travel restrictions also hit the company because most of its products are imported from abroad.
We used to import material for printing t-shirts from Dubai, China and Europe, but it's now very complicated to get them. Some of our suppliers are no longer operating and commercial flights were suspended.
The government lifted the lockdown in July, hoping to improve people's lives. But inflation has been rising and the Congolese franc has been falling against the dollar.
Many small-scale businesses in Kinshasa are facing difficulties breaking even after the COVID-19 lockdown because they lack the capital and access to technology that their larger counterparts have.
The DRC's economic activities are dominated by the informal sector, with most of its consumer goods imported from China and other neighboring countries. Jeremy Njanga is a trader who's struggling to survive the current crisis.
We have really suffered because of the coronavirus outbreak. Business has been very slow, but we are glad that the lockdown has been lifted. We've made losses, but at least we are working.
Businesses have been forced to adjust to the new restrictions, but those restrictions have put a heavier burden on people who are already struggling to stay afloat before the pandemic. Chris Ochamringa, CGTN, Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo.
U.S. stocks hit a new high on Tuesday with tech giants taking the lead. John Terrett tells us more from New York.
It is too early for Wall Street to worry about the direction of the U.S. presidential election, even though the Democrats' convention is digitally underway this week. Wall Street will worry about that in September, maybe even October, once the real polls start coming out and once policies are announced in more detail. On Tuesday, Wall Street overlooked U.S.-China tensions. They overlooked the issue of a lack of stimulus for the U.S. economy, at least a new round coming out of Washington, D.C. What they did do was concentrate on the tech stocks, though, and we had two new records. So names like Apple and Amazon and Microsoft and JD.com and Tesla really led the way on the Tuesday session. And at the end of the day, the Dow was down by 0.25%, but about 100 points better than it had been earlier in the session. The Nasdaq, a new record, up 0.7%. 4 out of 5 days it's been in the green. And the really interesting one is the broad market, the S&P 500, closing up by 0.25%, and it is now up 54% since its low and 5% to the good for the year 2021, closing at 33.89, 2 or 3 points above its previous highest close. And that is said to be the shortest bear market in history, going back to February the 19th of this year. John Terrett, CGTN, outside the New York Stock Exchange.
And we still have more news for you here in the program. Here's what's ahead. Scientists in Kenya aim to save the white rhinoceros from extinction through IVF.
Join us in Global Business and see Africa through our eyes. The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Kanater, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Ten eggs have been harvested from the last two remaining northern white rhinos. Kenyan scientists from the Ministry of Tourism worked with the German Leibniz Institute for Zoo and Wildlife Research and scientists from the Czech Republic. Najin and Fatu are the last remaining white rhinoceros in the world. Scientists are racing to save the species from extinction. The last male northern white rhino, Sudan, died in 2018. Kenyan officials attending the ceremony touched on the country's efforts to preserve the country's rhino population.
Kenya Wildlife Service is committed to this exercise completely, the scientists that we have in Kenya Wildlife Service, and of course, looking after the rhinos themselves. We are also here, part and parcel of looking after the rhinos to make sure they're protected.
We're optimistic with the knowledge that you have. I know it's the first time you guys have done it, but it's very optimistic that this will succeed. And the unfortunate part that Najin is aging, yeah. So yes, we have that worry, but I know the other things will happen and will be successful.
And now to our continued look at the wildebeest migration.
Yesterday on CGTN's Digital Safari, pressure mounts in the Masai Mara as the massive herd of wildebeest nervously await the crossing of the mighty Mara River. With the knowledge of sweet, bountiful grasslands awaiting them on the other side, the wildebeest herd courageously court danger. As they try their best to evade the crocodiles waiting in the water and the lions awaiting them on the other side. Catapulted by instinct and clouded by inexperience, a lone wildebeest calf rolls the dice and tries in vain to cross the river. An easy meal for a lingering crocodile. Further south in Juma, a pack of wild dogs were starting their day planning a much-needed hunt. Fueled by the desperate cries of hunger from their pups, the pack coordinated to bombshell a herd of impala, in hopes of confusing them and picking off a lonesome straggler. Amidst all the chaos, the pack disappeared into the thickets. Luckily, we caught up with them just as they were feasting on their prized kill. However, their victorious meal was interrupted by a young, naive hyena who felt they deserved some of the hard-earned cuisine. After a few tense moments of back and forth between the wild dog adults and the young hyena, the hyena's relentless attempt to get some scraps paid off as they disappeared with the less desirable part of the kill. Life was a lot lighter in Ngala as a pride of lions lazed about, resting as much as they could before starting their day. The dominant male took this opportunity to mate with a female in estrus and mark his territory. Over in the Pride Lands, the relaxed atmosphere continued, as some elephants decided to treat themselves to a snack, followed by a refreshing gulp of water. This seemed to be the order of the day, as the elephants in Djuma were also nourishing themselves on available refreshments. Join us every day at 4:30 GMT on CGTN digital platforms for your very own virtual safari through the African wild.
Let's now take a look at your sports news. Here's what's coming up.